Look at the back of your hands right now. Look at the small wrinkles, the spots, the way the skin sits on the tendons. That's not just aging skin. That's a downstream readout of something happening inside every cell in your body, every minute of every day. Roughly 20,000 chemical insults to the DNA inside each one of those cells, every 24 hours. Multiplied across 37 trillion cells, your body is fielding somewhere between 300 and 700 quadrillion DNA hits a day. And the only thing standing between that damage and what you'll feel in your knees, your gut, and your brain 10 years from now is a cellular cleanup crew that almost no one talks about. Most people are watching the smoke. The fire is somewhere else entirely. There is no billing code for prevention. There is no protocol code for eat 14 walnuts a day for 90 days. So your cardiologist is not going to walk you through what I'm about to walk you through. We're working toward 50,000 subscribers, and we're building this channel on one principle. The research exists. Most of it never gets translated for you. Let me translate it now. Dr. Davide D'Amico, lead author on the 2022 urolithin A clinical trial out of the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, said something in a press conference that stayed with me. He said his team was not expecting the magnitude. The compound induced cellular cleanup in aged human cells with the consistency of a pharmaceutical. Not a supplement, a pharmaceutical. Most people think inflammation is something you fight harder by adding more anti-inflammatory food. The research shows something different. Inflammation isn't always about adding fuel to a smaller fire. It's about removing the broken machines inside your cells that keep starting new fires. Your inflammatory markers are downstream. The broken machines are upstream, and almost nobody is measuring the upstream variable. Not slowed, not slightly improved, reversed. Even people who took fish oil daily, cut sugar from their diet, and walked 10,000 steps are still walking around with a C-reactive protein of 4, 5, 6. The villain is something called mitophagy collapse. The hero is a compound called urolithin A. And the cheapest, most accessible place on earth to find what your body needs to manufacture urolithin A is a single food that costs about $1 a day, a walnut. I'm Dr. Becker. I translate peer-reviewed research and document the case patterns that show up across the literature, so you see the evidence without the marketing. Before we go further, what I'm sharing is educational information based on published research. If you're under treatment for an autoimmune condition, on anticoagulants, or have a tree nut allergy, work with your physician before changing anything. Let me explain the physics of what's happening inside your cells right now, because once you see it, the protocol stops feeling like a wellness suggestion and starts feeling like basic engineering. Inside every one of those 37 trillion cells in your body, there are little engines called mitochondria. They are everywhere because everything alive needs energy. Here's where it gets interesting. Mitochondria break. They get damaged constantly. Free radicals leak out of them, hit the DNA inside them, hit the membrane, and after enough hits, they stop being efficient. They keep producing energy, but sloppily. They leak more reactive oxygen. They start dumping fragments of their own DNA into the cytoplasm of the cell, and your body interprets free-floating mitochondrial DNA as if it were a bacterial infection. It triggers an immune response inside your own cells. Without any pathogen present at all, that immune response is inflammation. So you have damaged mitochondria, leaking signals, and your immune system is firing on a target that doesn't exist. This is what chronic low-grade inflammation actually is at the cellular level. It's not aggression towards something foreign. It's a smoke alarm screaming at the smoke from broken machines inside your own cells. You are inflaming yourself. Now your body has a system for this. It's called mitophagy. Mito for mitochondria, phagy from the Greek for to eat. The word literally means the eating of broken mitochondria. When a mitochondrion gets damaged past a threshold, get recycled. New mitochondria, fresh, efficient, not leaking, get built from the parts. Mitochondria are the engines in your cells. Mitophagy is the recycling truck that comes through and removes the broken engines so new ones can be installed. When the recycling truck is running on schedule, your cells stay clean. When it stops coming, the broken engines pile up. The garage fills with smoke. Your immune system starts screaming. Here is the cardinal fact almost no one over 50 knows. Mitophagy efficiency drops 60 to 70% between the ages of 30 and 70. Read that again. Your cellular cleanup crew shrinks by 2/3 over 4 decades. The same amount of damage you accumulated at 25 now sits in your cells uncleaned. The smoke alarm, your immune system, has no choice but to keep screaming. Inflammation isn't something that simply happens to you as you age. It's something that builds up because the cleanup stopped. Of the 700 plus papers I've reviewed on cellular aging, the same diagnosis keeps surfacing. The upstream cause of chronic inflammation in adults over 60 is not what they're eating. It's what their cells can't take out. So how do you turn the recycling parts to make new ones? That's why intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating show measurable benefits. But fasting alone, in adults over 60, often isn't enough. The decline is too steep. We need the second mechanism, which is direct chemical activation of the mitophagy pathway through a compound called urolithin A. This is where it gets specific. Urolithin A is not a vitamin. It's not something you eat directly. You almost never find it in food. What you find in food is its precursor, a class of compounds called elagitanins, which are large polyphenols. When you eat elagitanins, they travel through your stomach mostly intact. They reach your large intestine. There, specific bacteria, primarily a genus called Gordonibacter, break them down in a multi-step process. The end product, after about 8 hours of bacterial work, is urolithin A. The urolithin A then gets absorbed into your bloodstream, distributed to humans. Urolithin A increased muscle endurance and biomarkers of mitochondrial health by 12% in 4 months, with the consistency of a pharmaceutical, in Dr. D'Amico's own words. Where do you get elagitanins? In a few places: pomegranate seeds, strawberries, raspberries, and the highest concentration in any common Western food, walnuts, specifically the brown thin skin around the walnut kernel. That bitter papery layer that some people peel off, that's where the elagitanins live. Don't peel it, eat it. Now I'm going to pause here because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, if this is real, why doesn't every cardiologist recommend this? Honestly, and this is going to sound cynical, when I first read the WAHA trial out of Hospital Clinic Barcelona, my reaction was that the effect size was too clean to be true. Then I looked at the methodology. 636 elders, 2-year randomized control, 15% of daily energy from walnuts. 3 of the major inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, and interferon gamma, measurably reduced over 24 months without any single dietary change. So if it's that clean, why isn't this the standard recommendation in every cardiology office? Because there is no revenue in it. Walnuts are a $1 food. There is no patent, there is no marketing engine, there is no pharmaceutical lobbyist sitting in front of guidelines committees pushing for 14 walnut halves daily. The healthcare system profits when you stay inflamed and managed. It does not profit from a handful of nuts. That's not a conspiracy, that's incentive structure. Once you see it, you stop being surprised it isn't on every prescription pad. Let me walk you through the second mechanism walnuts hit, because the urolithin A pathway isn't the only thing they do. Walnuts are the highest plant source on earth of alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA. ALA is an omega-3 fatty acid. Most people know omega-3s for fish oil, EPA and DHA. ALA is the plant version. Your body converts a small percentage of ALA into EPA and DHA, somewhere between 5 and 10% in men, 10 to 15% in women. That conversion is real, but inefficient. Here's what most people don't know. EPA and DHA aren't anti-inflammatory in the way most people think. They aren't fire blankets. The fire eventually goes out, and the firefighters come in to remove the burned debris. That's the cleanup phase. Resolvins drive the cleanup. Most anti-inflammatory drugs are smoke detectors that someone disabled. The fire is still there, you just don't hear the alarm anymore. Resolvins are different. Resolvins are firefighters. They put the fire out, then they organize the cleanup. Walnut ALA, even with its inefficient conversion to EPA and DHA, feeds this resolution pathway. People who eat walnuts daily over 6 months show measurable increases in resolving precursors in their plasma. The pathway gets fed. Mechanism number 3. Walnuts contain a form of vitamin E called gamma tocopherol. Now, when you read a vitamin E label on a multivitamin, what you're almost always reading is alpha tocopherol. That's the form of vitamin E the supplement industry standardized on decades ago. The problem is that there are multiple types of reactive species. Most multivitamins, by using only alpha tocopherol, leave the entire reactive nitrogen pathway unaddressed. Walnuts, almonds, pecans, and a handful of seeds. These are some of the only common foods with substantial gamma tocopherol. About 1 ounce of walnuts gives you nearly 3 milligrams of gamma tocopherol. That's the antioxidant the supplement industry forgot to put in your bottle. Mechanism number 4. L-arginine. Walnuts contain 4.5 grams of L-arginine per 100 grams. That's a substantial amount of an amino acid. L-arginine is the substrate your endothelial cells use to manufacture nitric oxide. Nitric oxide does several things. It relaxes the smooth muscle in your blood vessel walls. It reduces platelet stickiness. It decreases oxidative stress at the inner lining of your arteries. People with low nitric oxide synthesis have stiffer arteries, higher blood pressure, and more endothelial inflammation. Walnuts directly feed the substrate. Mechanism number 5. Walnut polyphenols, ellagic acid, juglone, gallic acid, directly inhibit something called NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B is a transcription factor. Your cells are constantly transcribing inflammation. Walnut polyphenols reduce NF-kappa B activity. The transcription rate slows. Less inflammatory protein gets built. Kofan and colleagues, in a 2020 secondary analysis of the WAHA trial published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry, measured NF-kappa B pathway activity in white blood cells of the walnut-eating elders. After 2 years, NF-kappa B expression was down 8.5%. The master switch of chronic inflammation was measurably dialed down. From a daily handful of nuts. And mechanism number 6, the one most people overlook. Walnuts contain about 158 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams. 60 different DNA repair enzymes inside your cells require magnesium as a cofactor. DNA polymerases, DNA ligases, excision repair enzymes. Without magnesium, these enzymes are like screwdrivers without handles. Tocopherol. Everything arrives together. So when you eat 14 walnut halves, you're not eating one nutrient. You're delivering a coordinated package. Elagitanins to feed urolithin A production, ALA to feed the resolution pathway, gamma tocopherol to neutralize the reactive species your supplements forgot, L-arginine to feed nitric oxide, polyphenols to suppress NF-kappa B, and magnesium to power DNA repair enzymes. 6 mechanisms in 1 ounce. Here's a scale gasp that I want you to sit with. A single ounce of walnuts, 14 halves, the size of a small handful, contains about 2.5 grams of alpha-linolenic acid. 2.5 grams, the same weight as a paperclip. That's enough to feed your inflammation resolution pathway for a full day. The whole machinery of putting fires out and cleaning up the smoke, fed by the weight of a paperclip in the palm of your hand. Once a day. Let me put the scale gasp inside another one. Every cell in your body sustains roughly 10,000 to 20,000 oxidative DNA hits per day. Your cells have to repair every one of them, or the damage compounds and the cell either dies, becomes cancerous, or becomes senescent. Adults over 60 are running on partial magnesium. Your patches are slow. Your repairs are incomplete. The damage piles up. And that's before we even talk about whether the broken mitochondria inside those same cells are getting recycled. Walnuts contribute about 158 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams. 14 halves give you roughly 40 milligrams. That's about 10% of an adult daily target. But it's 40 milligrams that arrives co-located with the polyphenols and the omega-3s in a single mouthful. Coordinated delivery. Imagine 2 adults sitting in the same kitchen. Same age, 68. Same weight. Same blood pressure. Same baseline CRP of 4. One of them eats 14 walnut halves with breakfast every day for a year. The other eats a bowl of cornflakes with milk for a year. Same calories at breakfast, same time of day. The only difference between them is 14 walnut halves versus a bowl of cornflakes. A year later, Based on what the Waha trial measured at 24 months on a similar daily dose, the walnut eater CRP is meaningfully lower, IL-6 is down, NF-kappa B activity in their white blood started, same CRP, same IL-6, same gut microbiome, perhaps slightly worse from the refined grain breakfast over time. Same person, same kitchen, same year, different cellular trajectory. That's the A and B comparison the Waha researchers ran for 636 adults. The cornflake equivalent group didn't get worse, they just didn't move. The walnut group moved. Over 24 months, the gap between them was the difference between a body resolving inflammation and a body holding onto it. Of the 700 plus papers I've reviewed on chronic inflammation in adults over 50, the same diagnosis surfaces over and over. The food the body needs is rarely complicated. The mechanisms are. But the food itself is usually simple, available, cheap, and not a supplement. A walnut is one of the cleanest examples of that pattern in the entire literature. Now let me tell you about a case that came across in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society with a 3-year history of unexplained fatigue. Started at 64. Joint stiffness in his hands every morning lasting 40 minutes or longer. He couldn't button a shirt for the first half hour after waking. His cardiologist found a C-reactive protein of 6.2. Normal CRP is under 1. He was elevated by a factor of 6. 3 different specialists. The cardiologist focused on his arteries. They were fine. The rheumatologist tested for autoimmune markers. Negative. The gastroenterologist scoped him. Mild diverticular pouches, but nothing inflamed. One PA in the cardiology office suggested daily ibuprofen to manage the inflammation. Ralph, an old-school man who had been raised on the principle that you don't take a drug unless you know exactly what it does, refused. So he tried things on his own. He cut gluten, no change in 3 months. Cut dairy, slight improvement, not dramatic. Started fish oil capsules. His CRP dropped from 6.2 to 5.1. Worth noting, but not what he was hoping for. A relatively new specialty in his small town. The geriatrician, on the 3rd visit, did something none of the previous specialists had done. He asked Ralph one specific question. He said, "What does your breakfast look like?" Ralph said, "Cereal, milk, banana. 5 days a week. Same thing." The geriatrician didn't write a prescription. He didn't order more tests. He gave Ralph a piece of paper. On it he wrote, 14 raw, unsalted walnut halves daily, soaked overnight in filtered water, eaten within an hour of waking, for 90 days. Track morning stiffness time. Retest CRP at day 90. That was the prescription. Ralph's wife thought it was absurd. Ralph thought it was absurd. He'd seen 4 specialists, and the answer was nuts? But he was tired enough and frustrated enough that he tried it. He bought a pound of raw walnuts, soaked 14 halves the first night, ate them with a glass of water. Week 3, gum bleeding on flossing, which he'd had for years, stopped. He didn't think much of it at the time. Week 4, fatigue that had been a wall every afternoon at 3 lifted slightly. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Week 6, morning stiffness was down to 15 minutes. Energy at 3 in the afternoon stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a window. At day 90, he went back to the geriatrician with the CRP retest. The lab result came back at 1.4, down from 6.2. The geriatrician's notes flagged the urolithin A and mitophagy mechanism as the most likely driver in the chart. 18 months later, Ralph's CRP was holding at 1.1. Morning stiffness was down to 8 minutes. He still ate his 14 walnuts every day. He told his grandkids he was running on engine recycling. Now, what was actually happening inside Ralph's body? Everything I described in the mechanism section. The elagitannins from his 14 walnuts were being processed by his Gordonibacter bacteria into urolithin A. Urolithin A reactivated mitophagy. The broken mitochondria in his cells, which had been leaking inflammatory signals for years, finally got cleaned. The upstream cause was being addressed for the first time in a decade. The cardiologist, the rheumatologist, the gastroenterologist, they were all looking for inflammation as if it were aggression. as if there were some pathogen, some autoimmune attack, some structural lesion. There wasn't. The inflammation was downstream of broken cellular machinery. Once the machinery got recycled, the inflammation went away. Everything I explained about urolithin A and mitophagy and NF-kappa B, that is exactly what was happening in Ralph's body every single day after he ate his walnuts. The protocol wasn't magic, it was physics. Specific compounds activating specific cellular pathways that had stopped working. Now I want you to do something. I want you to participate in the diagnosis instead of just listening. There are 3 tests you can do right now, sitting where you are, that will tell you whether you're carrying chronic inflammation. None of them require equipment. Test number 1, the morning stiffness test. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, before you do anything else, lie there for 30 seconds. Then start trying to make a fist with each hand. Squeeze, release. Squeeze 5 to 15 minutes, that's mild chronic inflammation. 15 to 30 minutes, moderate to high. Over 30 minutes consistently, that is a finding that warrants a CRP test from your physician. And not a normal CRP, specifically a high sensitivity CRP, abbreviated HS-CRP. That's the version that can detect low-grade chronic inflammation, which the standard CRP test misses. Test number 2, the gum bleeding test. Right now, when you next floss your teeth, look at the floss, or watch the sink. Are your gums bleeding? If yes, even a little, your gums are inflamed. And here's the connection most people don't make. Inflamed gums are not separate from your body. Your gums are connected to your bloodstream. Bacterial endotoxins from inflamed gums leak into the bloodstream and elevate systemic CRP. Studies have repeatedly shown that periodontal disease and chronic systemic inflammation track together. If your gums bleed regularly, even slightly, that is a window into systemic inflammation, not just oral health. Test number 3, the eyebrow even when you're not frowning. Some people call it the 11s, the glabellar lines. A persistent vertical crease in someone who is genuinely relaxed correlates with both elevated chronic stress and elevated CRP. It's not a diagnostic, it's a visual proxy. The reason the connection exists is that chronic stress drives cortisol, cortisol drives inflammation, and chronic inflammation contributes to skin laxity and connective tissue changes that make those creases more prominent at younger ages than they otherwise would be. How old are you right now? Write it in the comments. I want to see which age group makes up the majority of our viewers, because the protocol changes meaningfully between the early 50s and the 70s. The fundamentals stay the same, the dosing and the timeline shift. Now let me give you the full protocol. I call it the walnut hour. 3 phases. 5 minutes of preparation, about $1 a day. Here's exactly how it works. Phase 1 is leave them on the counter overnight. Why soaking matters. Walnuts contain phytic acid, which binds to minerals like magnesium and zinc and reduces their bioavailability. Soaking for 8 to 12 hours hydrolyzes much of the phytic acid. The walnuts also become softer, easier to chew, and easier on your gut. That's it. That's the prep. In the morning, drain the water. Eat the 14 walnut halves within 1 hour of waking. With breakfast, before breakfast, on top of plain Greek yogurt, with a piece of fruit, however you want. Crucially, eat the brown skin. Don't pick it off. The brown papery skin around the kernel contains the highest concentration of elagitannins. That's where most of the urolithin A precursor lives. That's the ammunition. Why morning timing? Because mitophagy is most active during fasted states, and most people have just spent 8 to 12 hours not eating. Your Gordonibacter bacteria have 8 hours of overnight processing time. Your cells are already in a partial autophagy state from sleep, and the walnut compounds get absorbed into a body primed to use them. You'll feel almost nothing in week 1. That's normal. The microbiome takes about 7 to 14 days to start producing measurable. Phase 2 is steady state, weeks 2 through 8. Continue the 14 walnut halves daily, soaked overnight, eaten in the morning. Add 1 tablespoon of pomegranate seeds 2 to 3 times a week. Pomegranate seeds also contain elagitannins, but in slightly different forms, punicalagins. Different elagitanin isomers feed the urolithin A pathway through different bacterial steps. Adding pomegranate ensures you're hitting the pathway from multiple angles. By week 4, most people in the WAHA trial showed measurable drops in inflammatory cytokines. By week 8, IL-6 and IL-1 beta were typically down 5 to 12%. CRP was tracking down. Morning stiffness was reducing. Phase 3 is the mitophagy boost. Months 2 and 3. Continue the 14 walnut halves daily. Add a 12 to 14 hour overnight fast 2 times per week. 8 in the evening to 8 or 10 in the morning. That's it. 2 days a week. You're not eating between dinner and breakfast for 14 hours. The reason this works: fasting amplifies mitophagy at the cellular level. The walnut compounds amplify it further. Stacking them is synergistic. Together, they push bleeding reduced or eliminated, fatigue meaningfully lifted, and a subjective sense of engine recycling that Ralph described in plain English. Cells that work, inflammation that backs off, energy that returns. If this is reframing how you think about chronic inflammation, please subscribe and hit the like button. We're close to 50,000 subscribers, and every person who subscribes makes the next person who needs this content more likely to find it. The algorithm rewards engagement. Your one click is what tells the system to keep showing this kind of evidence-based work to other adults over 50. 5 seconds. Subscribe. Now let me tell you what not to do. 3 things destroy the protocol. First, roasted salted walnuts. The roasting process at temperatures above 320 degrees Fahrenheit destroys roughly 30% of the polyphenols. The elagitanins are heat sensitive. The omega-3 fatty acids are heat after opening. The omega-3s oxidize at room temperature. Second, walnut oil that's been heated for cooking. The same destruction happens. Walnut oil is excellent on a salad cold. Walnut oil heated in a pan is a waste. If you cook with walnut oil, you've spent money on a product whose active compounds are gone before they reach your tongue. Third, eating more than 60 grams a day. Twice the protocol amount won't double the benefit. The mitophagy pathway has saturation kinetics. Beyond the threshold, more substrate doesn't produce more urolithin A. Your bacterial population is the bottleneck. And meanwhile, you're adding calories. Stick to 14 halves, about 30 grams, about 1 ounce, about 185 calories, daily. Now, red flags. Things that should send you to a doctor today, not to a video. If your morning stiffness is progressively worsening over weeks despite the protocol, see your physician. That can indicate a developing autoimmune condition like rheumatoid arthritis or polymyalgia rheumatica that requires medical evaluation. The walnuts won't address an active autoimmune cascade. If your CRP comes back persistently elevated after persistent very high CRP is not something to manage with food. If you're on warfarin, apixaban, rivaroxaban, or any anticoagulant, discuss with your physician before starting. Walnuts contain a small amount of vitamin K, and while the amount is modest, consistency matters with anticoagulants. Your dose may need monitoring. If you have a tree nut allergy, this protocol is contraindicated, period. There is no walnut workaround for a walnut allergy. There are alternative elagitanin sources, pomegranate, strawberries, but the dose math is different and the protocol is different. We'll cover that in another video. If you have active diverticulitis, wait until the flare resolves. Soaked walnuts are gentler than raw, but during an active diverticular flare, any nut consumption can aggravate inflamed pouches. If none of those apply to you, you can breathe. You're going to be fine. The quality of that life, though, is worth protecting. And the protocol I just described is one of the cleanest, cheapest, most evidence-supported things you can do for it. Foods that synergize with walnuts. These all contribute additional elagitanins or anthocyanins that feed the urolithin A pathway and the broader polyphenol load. Foods that work against walnuts. Industrial seed oils, soybean oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, anything in a yellow squeeze bottle in a fast food kitchen. These oils are high in oxidized linoleic acid, which directly competes with omega-3 pathways and feeds inflammation. If you're spending $1 a day on walnuts and $10 a day on takeout fried in seed oil, you are pulling in opposite directions. The walnuts won't outrun the seed oil. Excess sugar, particularly fructose-heavy sugars from soda, juice, and processed snacks. Fructose at high doses overloads the liver, drives uric acid, drives inflammation. If you're on the protocol but drinking 2 sodas a day, you'll get partial benefit, not the full effect. Alcohol. More than 7 drinks a week for women, 14 for men, regularly, will independently elevate CRP and offset much of what the walnuts are doing. Moderate use is workable, heavy use is not. Here's 14 halves overnight in filtered water. Every night. It takes 90 seconds. Step 3. Eat them within 1 hour of waking, skin and all. Do not peel the brown layer. Step 4. Track 2 metrics daily for 90 days. Morning stiffness time in minutes. Gum bleeding when flossing, yes or no. Step 5. At day 90, get a high sensitivity CRP test from your physician. Not standard CRP, specifically high sensitivity. Compare against your baseline. That's the entire protocol. 5 steps, about $1 a day, about 2 minutes of preparation. If your CRP is dropping, your morning stiffness is shortening, and your gums have stopped bleeding by day 90, you've just done what most cardiology offices cannot prescribe, and most rheumatology consults cannot match. You've turned the cellular cleanup crew back on. The recycling truck is running again. In that case, the next step is a urolithin A supplement directly. The brand name is Mitopure, developed by Amacentis, the same Lausanne lab from the EPFL trial. It's expensive. It bypasses the microbiome bottleneck. Ask your physician. That's a separate conversation. Inflammation isn't a battle you fight harder. It's a fire you stop feeding. Once you remove the broken cellular machinery that's leaking smoke, your body returns to its baseline. Not perfect, but quiet. Quiet is what aging well actually feels like. It's not the absence of every symptom. It's the absence of the constant low-grade noise. I'm Dr. Becker, and I've spent the last several years watching the same pattern across hundreds of case studies and thousands of papers. Most chronic inflammation in adults over 60 isn't aggressive disease. It's accumulated cellular debris. The protocol I just described requires no prescription, no procedure, no money beyond $1 a day for a bag of nuts. It requires the understanding of how your cells actually work and the discipline to use that knowledge for 90 days. Your cardiologist is not going to walk you through this at your next appointment. There is no revenue in it and no time on a 12-minute office visit. That is exactly what this profits from managing your symptoms indefinitely. I profit from you not needing me anymore. Subscribe if that difference matters to you. Stay curious, stay healthy. Dr. Becker.